Good morning. My name is Rocky Moretti. Moretti spelled Moretti, and I'm the Director of Policy and Research with TRIP, a national transportation research nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C. Welcome to today's webinar of TRIP's new report for Texas. How we'll handle this is I'll make my initial comments, and then we'll hear from Alvin New, who is the commissioner with the Texas Transportation Commission, and then from Drew Campbell, who's chair of the Transportation Advocates of Texas. I'll also, after my initial remarks, make a few additional remarks in Spanish for the Spanish language media. In terms of questions, once we have heard the comments from all of the speakers, you have a raise hand option or also a chat option where you could indicate you have a question. What we'll do at that point then is elevate you. My colleague Carolyn Kelly on the call will elevate you to the actual panel so that you can ask your questions or follow-up questions and direct those questions to whichever speaker you wish. TRIP is an organization that was founded just over 50 years ago in 1971. And since that time, we have released over 600 reports at the national, state, and local level, looking at the condition of the country's transportation system, also its impact on the public and motorists, and also on the economy. And TRIP as an organization is supported by a coalition of manufacturing, insurance, construction, labor, and engineering organizations. They look to us to put out the latest information on transportation. This report, Keeping Rural Texas Connected, is based on the latest data from the Texas Department of Transportation, as well as the U.S. Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration. This report examines the critical components of the state's rural transportation system and evaluate statewide and regionally their adequacy in providing reliable and safe mobility in Texas' rural areas, but also in the connectivity between the state's rural and urban communities. The report finds that Texas heartland is an important source of food, fuel, and fiber, not only in Texas, but across the country. And that the quality of its transportation network is absolutely vital to the quality of life in Texas rural communities, and provides the first and last link in a regional, state, and national and international supply chain. Over the last decade, Texas has continued to make significant improvements in its rural transportation system. However, with growing population, energy and agricultural production, and additional economic activities in Texas's rural areas, the system continues to need to be expanded and improved to meet the growing transportation needs of the state's rural communities. We found that Texas rural communities face several transportation challenges. One, the system lacks adequate capacity in some corridors to support continued growth and travel. And the system continues to need to have additional improvements to its connectivity across the state. The state's rural transportation system also carries a higher share of large trucks than its urban counterpart, which puts more stress on those roadways. And finally, the state's rural transportation system has the highest rate of traffic fatalities in the state and needs additional safety improvements to address this. We point out in the report that the state's rural economy is driven by agriculture, by energy production, and forestry and tourism, all areas critically reliant on transportation. And also the state's international and maritime ports are absolutely vital to the working of the state's economy and are very much reliant on the rural transportation system as it moves goods within the state and then to other states and internationally. In fact, we point out the Laredo World Trade Bridge, which currently is carrying 17,000 trucks a day. We anticipate, or the research on that board report anticipates that the number of daily truck crossings will increase by approximately 150% by 2050. We also note that in Texas, if you look at its rural transportation system, that the traffic fatality rate on the state's rural non-interstate routes is approximately double on all other roads. And we know that if you make improvements, including adding additional lanes, adding paved shoulders, adding rumble strips, all of these have a significant benefit in terms of improving traffic safety in Texas. To improve reliability and also safety on the state's transportation system, the Texas Department of Transportation has committed significant resources to improving its major rural Texas trunk system, which is its major rural roads. And in fact, since 2015 has completed 251 major projects at a cost of approximately $7 billion. TxDOT has also identified 4 key rural corridors for expansion to 4-lane divided highway capacity as being critical to meeting the state's needs for rural connectivity. These routes include US 59 from Laredo to Houston, US 87 and US 83 from the New Mexico border to I-10, US 281 from Interstate 20 to San Antonio, and US 69 and 175 from Dallas to Beaumont. Of the approximately 1,200 miles of these major portions of roadways, the improvements have either been completed or are underway on approximately 2/3 of those miles. But at this point, the additional capacity on the remaining 1/3 at this point, the funding has not been identified. Approximately about $4 billion still are needed to complete those final portions. Nonetheless, we just saw last month the Texas Transportation Commission approve a 10-year transportation plan, the Unified Transportation Program, that puts in place $14 billion for investment in the state's rural districts and approximately $7 billion for investment in its Texas trunk roads, including the 4 corridors we've just mentioned. In conclusion, providing Texas with a rural transportation network that will support further economic growth and maintain its quality of life will require Texas to continue to invest in its rural transportation system that is safe and reliable. I'm now going to add a few comments in Spanish, and then we'll hear from our additional speakers. La seguridad y confiabilidad del sistema de transporte rural de Texas es muy importante para la calidad de vida en las comunidades rurales en Texas. El buen transporte es esencial en las áreas rurales para brindar acceso a empleos, facilitar el movimiento de productos, servicios de personas, acceder a oportunidades de atención médica, educación y brindar acceso a actividades sociales y recreativas. Durante la última década, Texas ha continuado realizando inversiones significativas para expandir la capacidad de sus caminos rurales. Los caminos rurales de Texas enfrentan una serie de desafíos. No tienen suficiente capacidad en algunos corredores para soportar el creciente aumento en viaje de vehículos de carga y pasajeros y tienen una alta tasa de muertes por accidentes de tránsito. La economía rural de Texas depende de la producción de extracción de energía, la manufactura de agricultura y el turismo, todo lo cual requiere un sistema de transporte seguro y eficiente. El informe también encontró que la tasa de mortalidad en las rutas rurales de Texas es aproximadamente el doble de la tasa de mortalidad en todas las demás rutas del estado. Mejorar la seguridad en los caminos rurales del estado requerirá proceder con mejoras para hacer estos caminos más seguros. En particular, el Departamento de Transporte de Texas ha identificado 4 corredores rurales para la expansión a fin de satisfacer la necesidad del estado de mejorar la conectividad rural. Las rutas son Ruta 59 de Laredo a Houston, rutas 87 y 83 desde la frontera de Nuevo México hasta la carretera interestatal 10, rutas 281 desde la carretera interestatal 20 hasta San Antonio y rutas 69 y 175 de Dallas y Beaumont. De los aproximadamente 1,200 millas en estas partes de las rutas, las mayorías se completarán o continúan en 2 tercios. Pero las mejoras necesarias para el otro tercio no tienen financiamiento. En conclusión, Texas necesita continuar invirtiendo. En conclusión, Texas necesita continuar invirtiendo en un sistema de transporte rural que sea seguro y tenga un alto nivel de accesibilidad para apoyar a las comunidades rurales de Texas. With that, we're going to turn it over to Commissioner New.
Good morning, and in response to the report and to maybe enhance some of the information, I just want to give some of the thoughts related to Texas and the Texas Transportation Commission's efforts to take care of rural Texas. The first thing we do is make sure that we describe and talk about the symbiotic relationship between rural Texas and urban or metropolitan Texas. This is not really something we should be thinking of funding as either or, but and. It is important that the raw goods that are created in rural Texas are able to make it to those markets. If you look at the way our products work, we have cotton produced in Texas, we have a lot of vegetables produced in Texas, we have a lot of cattle and sheep and goats produced in Texas. All of those have to get to market for the food to be where people live. At the same time, we also create 29% of the cotton in the United States in Texas, and that fiber is what puts the clothing on us. And so we have to get that product to the different places around the world for textile work. We have timber that is important to the growing part of all of the population of the state, but also the country. And we have water resources actually start in rural Texas. So it's critical that the rural parts of Texas and the urban and metropolitan areas understand that this is a symbiotic relationship. Now, with that part described from the rural perspective, think of it this other way. The ports are created, the inland ports and multimodal facilities and manufacturing tend to be around the more urban, really strongly tend to be around the more urban and metropolitan markets. So our products from the rural part of the state need these urban and metropolitan markets to make sure that our products get to the marketplace, are stored in warehouses, and then redistributed across the country and across the world. It therefore is very critically important that everyone understand the symbiotic relationship between urban and rural Texas. If you have that going on, and we describe that and make sure that each of our Texans understand it's in their best interest to support transportation and general infrastructure investment throughout all of the state. So not just where you live, but everyone in the state of Texas benefits from investment in rural Texas. The next thing we talk about is safety. 50% of the fatal accidents occur in rural Texas. 50% when you have around 15% of the population and you're creating 50% of the fatal accidents. It shows that there's a very strong need for more shoulders, wider roads, and ultimately divided 4-lane roads, because that's the safest way to move products and people from one place to the other. It should be noted that it is down from 60% of the fatal accidents 20 years ago. The decline can be attributed to two things. More people as a percent of the population live in urban areas now, but importantly, the improvements of added passing lanes and shoulders to the 2-lane roads in rural Texas have made it safer to travel there and to haul freight. As described in the report, I want to talk about the key corridors and the interstate improvements and the trunk system. To that end, we have worked to designate and to build out I-69, I-14, and I-27. So we have a lot of interstate improvements in front of us in rural Texas that will make it much safer to move the products and the people in those places. That will dramatically change the way freight moves and where it moves, and it will improve safety. We are also focused on 4 key corridors as described that will provide economic opportunity in rural Texas, allow efficient alternative routes for freight to help decrease congestion in cities, avoid and help with it'll also help with hurricane evacuations and rural safety for everyday activities. These corridors are almost exclusively taken from the 1990s trunk system work by TxDOT. The trunk system's goal is to make 4-lane divided roads the safest way to drive, available to commute from any community in the state of Texas of 20,000 people or more to get to major markets, urban areas, and metropolitan markets. So if we can move people, get roads built within 20 miles of all of these communities of some size throughout the state of Texas, what we are doing is making it incredibly safer for those people to get to and from where they want to go. But it's also much safer for people passing through Texas with freight or on personal trips because they're on divided 4-lane highways. And that is the goal of what we're doing with key corridors and continuing the work of the trunk system. Our rural investment is now approaching $14 billion, or it's just over $14 billion for the next 10 years. And that is up 600% from just 8 years ago. We can do a lot with that, and we'll work for more improvements in safety and efficiency. And we will continue to connect rural Texas to the markets that they support and that they provide the raw goods for. And we will continue to work on describing that as a symbiotic relationship between rural Texas and urban and metropolitan Texas. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. We will now hear from Drew Campbell.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm Drew Campbell. I'm chairman of the Transportation Advocates of Texas. We're a coalition of transportation agencies and groups across the state of Texas who advocate for funding for transportation. And I'm here today to congratulate and thank the commissioner in particular for all the things that we've been doing. Hold on one second. Sorry about that. This comes from Zooming. But very quickly, what I want to say is that when I first started advocating for transportation in the state of Texas, we had just a little over 10 million people living here in the state. And you can imagine the dollar value of what we were working with back then was a lot smaller than it is today. But through the hard work of the TxDOT commissioners, through the legislature, and by getting things like Prop 1 and Prop 7 so that we have dedicated dollars towards transportation, we're now able to address not only congestion, not only clear lanes, but the very important rural transportation system that's so vital to the economic health of the state, as well as, like the commissioner pointed out, to the nation. It's very important that we're successful here. We're adding 1,100 new Texans every day. Subsequently, we've got to be thinking about not only maintaining the over 330,000 miles of highways, but we've got to be thinking about the new projects, which are growing very quickly, not only in our urban and suburban areas, but also in the rural areas. And I'm here on behalf of the board to congratulate the TxDOT commissioners, and particularly you, Commissioner New, for advocating for the rural areas, because it's a voice that's needed. And you've been so successful at making sure that we maintain our pledge to a good rural transportation system. And with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. I'm gonna ask my colleague Carolyn Kelly to facilitate any questions, and we'll sort of give everyone a minute or two if they want to indicate if they have any questions.
Yeah. Thanks, Rocky. As Rocky had noted earlier, we'll have a brief Q&A with the panelists now. If you have a question that you'd like to ask of one of the panelists, you can either use the raise hand function that's right at the bottom of your screen, or you can also submit your question to via the chat function as well. While we wait for some questions to come in, I'll just also note that the full report, as well as the news release that goes along with that, is now up on the TRIP website. You can find that at tripnet, tripnet.org. We'll also have a full recording of this morning's news conference up there, likely around 11 o'clock local time as well. So I see Doug Begley has indicated that he's got a question. So Doug, I'll promote you to a panelist, and you should be able to ask your question live of the panel. If you just need to unmute your line first. You can go ahead.
What I'm curious about is how either Commissioner New or Mr. Moretti or Campbell, anyone, where you think that the IIJA with the federal infrastructure bill, where you can leverage that to get some of these projects moving.
Well, certainly the passage of the IIJA at the end of 2021 was critical, a significant increase in funds available to Texas and in all other states. And certainly states have been incorporating that into their long-range plans. As we also point out in the report, the unfortunate part is it's also, I mean, it's critical, but it's unfortunate that there's also a point where there's significant inflation in construction costs. And as we point out in the report, the latest data from the Texas Department of Transportation found that through July in 1 year, the cost of highway construction had increased by 27%. So certainly it's, you know, thank goodness that the new federal program kicked in, but we would hope that as we see a moderation of inflation, that it would be even more effective in supporting more of these projects. Perhaps the commissioner might have something to add to that in terms of how it's impacting the program in Texas.
Well, it's straightforward. It has been budgeted in over the next 5 years. It's adding roughly another $1 billion a year to the that we're able to undertake in the state of Texas. The pro and the good side of that is the next 5 years have an extra $1 billion. The downside, if there is one, is only that number one, we're having to spend that money because of the super value of the increase that you just described in the cost of doing business in transportation. But also the fact that it's a 5-year commitment. And so it's not something we can make strong long-term plans against, because 5 years from now, we don't know what the political environment will be. We don't know what the health of the economy will be over the course of those years. And so we will be spending that money gratefully, and we will be able to expedite the efforts that we make. And that's what we have been doing. It's only been about 5 or 6 years since our UTP, our 10-year plan, was around $32 to $35 billion. And now it's at right around $80 billion. We are planning and programming $117 billion over the next 10 years, including construction costs and including other things like right-of-way and environmental studies and all of the engineering that takes place and that kind of thing. This type of investment could only happen with increased funding. Prop 1, Prop 7, that we're grateful to the people of the state of Texas. And then things like IIJA from the federal government. All of these things create the funds that allow us to make these things happen.
All right. Thank you. I've got one more question from Shania Jackson with KCBD. Shania, you're unmuted. Go ahead and ask your question, please.
Thank you. Yes, I was just wondering how these implications will and implications and changes of the highways will affect the West Texas area. Obviously, that's a very large rural area here in Texas. So do you all have any statistics on that, or?
Commissioner, perhaps you could address that.
So I will do the best. 174 in Texas that are rural out of 254. So they are all over the state. They, Lufkin, Texas, and places like that in East Texas, Paris and Texarkana and Texas and Freer and all down through the valley. A lot of the point I'm making is West Texas is seen as rural Texas, and it is very rural. Some 13% of the population lives west of I-35, so it is very rural. But I want to be clear that rural Texas is all over Texas, and so that's important for us to know. Now, specifically, we've gone from roughly $2 billion over 10 years to $3 billion over 10 years just in the Odessa district. We have 25 districts in Texas transportation in TxDOT's world, 25 districts. One of those is Odessa, Texas. It has gone from 2 billion, or a little under 2 billion, planned over 10 years to $3 billion planned over 10 years because of all of the influx of people and the amount of oil and gas infrastructure going on there. There's also a lot of wind energy and solar energy being placed in West Texas. And so we have dramatic increases in needs for rural roads to support that type of investment in infrastructure. And we have increases in the Abilene district. We have increases in the Lubbock district. We have increases in the Amarillo district. We have increases in the El Paso district. We have increases in funding in the San Angelo district. So when you look at West Texas, nearly every district out there has seen a fairly dramatic increase in funding. San Angelo is a smaller district, but they've gone from around 0.6 billion to 0.9 billion over a 10-year time frame. You hear those numbers, they're 50% increases just in the matter of around 5 or 6 years. So there's a large increase in West Texas. Another key thing is that the Category 12 funds that are discretionary for the commission, some $489 million has been put in place just to support the I-20 development in Midland, Odessa, because that's the least safe places in the state of Texas to travel. It has a ton of truck traffic, bridges being hit, and so the entire commission's discretion has been to put a lot of funding in that Midland, Odessa area on that interstate project. So it's all of the commissioners supporting things that are going on in West Texas.
One of the things, Commissioner, too, that I think that some of the folks may not realize is that one of the challenges TxDOT has is all the different soils, all the different temperate zones, everything from desert all the way to the heavy timber of East Texas. And it means that we're not a cookie cutter state. What works in East Texas obviously won't work that way out in West Texas. And it's something that the TxDOT has to address that most other states don't.
No doubt. It's fortunate that West Texas is less expensive to build in. There are fewer bridges needed over water. There are less trees to remove. There's, so there are some things about having limestone and having the West Texas terrain that make it more efficient to build roads. And thank goodness it's that way. It sets it up where you don't have to have as much money to get things done.
All right, thank you. And next we have a question from Christina Burgess. Christina, if you unmute your line, you'll be able to ask your question of the panelists.
Good morning, everyone. I will say my question, I think you guys might have hit on a majority of it. I'm here in Midland, Odessa, Texas now in News West 9. And like you guys were saying earlier, I know we have a lot of oil field workers here and just really that transportation that goes along our roads. Could you speak a little bit more maybe to that I-20 project? I know you mentioned that's the big one in Midland, Odessa.
I'll address that, and then perhaps either of the other speakers can jump in. But obviously, in an area of significant energy extraction, but also we're seeing this with wind energy. Anything that brings in a lot of heavy vehicles And we've also seen this in other parts of the country where we've seen a significant increase in energy extraction. Oftentimes those roads are not built for those types of large vehicles, and that creates quite a challenge. And so what we've seen is states having to increase funding, not only in the case of adding additional highway capacity, which is also very vital, but hardening some of that infrastructure that previously was probably carrying a far lighter load, and in an area with increasingly intensive energy work, the system has to be built to handle those larger vehicles.
So let's specifically for the Permian Basin and the Midland, Odessa, and greater Permian Basin area, you know, remember that some 3 years ago, we put together a $600 million specific fund for that area. The reason is exactly what was just described. You know, West Texas, around anything west of Abilene and around Abilene, west of Abilene up into the panhandle of Texas and out through the Permian Basin, is a strong part where wind energy is created. That is a challenge to rural roads and to keeping roads in good repair. But then when you put with that sand production and sand movement and water production and movement, and then the extraction of oil and gas, we certainly have a big challenge to take care of rural Texas in the Permian Basin. That's the reason the $600 million was created, and it is why we have increased the funding in the Odessa district, which covers a lot of that, by 50% and $1 billion. And it is also why there's some funding in the Lubbock district, the San Angelo district, and the eastern part of the El Paso district, because they are all part of the Permian Basin effort. So it's TxDOT's effort to help fund that. And then I am from that part of the world, so I know the roads. 176 is one of the roads that's a challenge. 115 is a state highway that's a challenge. State Highway 18 is a challenge. State Highway 285 is a challenge. Highway 302 is a challenge. And we're fully clearly understanding of the fact that while the statewide average of truck percentage is around 19, the statewide percentage of trucks on those roads, to the point that you made, is 36%, 42%. These parts of the state double the average for the rest of the state. And so you can see that it's a tremendous amount of trucks out there. The number of fatalities is much higher per mile driven than it is in the rest of the state. That is why we're spending an enormous amount of money and an enormous amount of effort to help get those roads built up, to get some of them divided, to get shoulders on them, to get passing lanes in. And we have been able to get that done over the last 2 or 3 years, and we'll continue to emphasize that effort. And we can thank the commission, and we can thank the governor and his staff for the fact that there's really good focus to go along with the people in the Permian Promise and the private sector and what they're spending out there. That is why that is working as well as it's working.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. And we also have a follow-up question from Doug Begley. So Doug, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Well, I was just curious that you talked a lot about funding and the need for funding and additional revenue coming in, but do we have the manpower to build this? If you were to expand and be able to radically increase the amount of construction, do we even have the guys to bend steel and pour concrete and design new shoulders?
So the answer to that is yes, but it has required a real change in the way things are done, because so much of it is now done by private industry. So for the engineering was one of the points that you made. And historically, TxDOT would have been creating, somewhere around 60% or even more of the engineering. Now that it has flipped, and we get about 70% of the engineering from private industry and around 30% of the engineering within TxDOT. The fortunate thing, in a sense, is that we have ramped up the Prop 1 was passed in 2014. Prop 2 or Prop 7 was passed in 2015. So the general contracting community has seen what would be coming and been able to develop larger, larger workforces, bring on the equipment. Rental equipment has been brought to Texas from all over the country and frankly from other countries. And also we have been spending enough money in Texas that we have a lot of other engineering firms and general contracting firms move to Texas. So say maybe they were based in Arizona and they decided to start bidding on contracts in El Paso, Texas, or they were based in Colorado and now they're bidding on contracts in Amarillo and in Lubbock. That has been occurring and will continue to occur. So we have growth in our general contracting community. We have some growth in TxDOT. We have been allowed we had nearly 15,000 employees. We went down to a number in the 11,000s. We are now back up in about 12,600 employees at TxDOT. So this is being addressed by the legislature. It's being addressed by private industry, and it's being addressed by a recreation of who does the work.
And as to manpower, I mention 1,100 people are moving to Texas every day. So the labor force is coming. I think everybody recognizes the fact that the construction of highways is open for business here in Texas and will continue to be so. Hence, as the commissioner correctly points out, we have a lot of movement of companies and labor moving to Texas.
All right, thank you. And we've got one more question that I'll relay that comes from Erica with KXAN in Austin. She said she's having some issues with her microphone, but her question was asking for some elaboration on the 281 corridor.
281 it runs north and south east of Interstate 35. And there's also State Highway 130 that runs north and south west of State 35. And so we know that the Austin, Texas and San Antonio, Texas areas are expected to double in population over the next 20 years or so. We know that there will be continued growth along the Interstate 35 corridor. So we have been making effort for around 4 years now to be sure that we are trying to work on expanding US Highway 281 that runs from San Antonio to Interstate 20 just west of Weatherford, Texas. So it allows an alternate path for freight and for people to go from the valley, or Laredo was described as having 17,000 trucks a day and expected to grow dramatically. The valley will also have a lot of growth and border crossings of freight. And so when you look at those things, having more viable alternatives for people to make choices when they're coming up from the south and they get to the San Antonio area, to decide how to go north and then still get to those inland ports. So 281 is being developed so that we can move freight and people on an alternate path that's reasonably close to Interstate 35 with north-south orientation.
And the report also includes a map, but also information on the status of that corridor. So of the 205 miles that are contemplated to be expanded to highway, 4-lane highway capacity, currently 17 miles are complete and 3 miles are under construction. So you can go on to have a look at the report and get a little bit additional information of where the status of that improvement.
All right, thank you. And I believe this will be our last question unless any others come in, but Shania Jackson with KCBD has a follow-up question. So if you unmute your line, you should be able to ask that question.
Yes. Do we know if these rural highway changes and expansions will be happening in Lubbock specifically?
So the biggest project being funded in Lubbock is the new loop. And so a lot of the funding in the UTP that is specific to Lubbock, Texas, is the new loop that will go around Lubbock. Recognize that Lubbock, the district of Lubbock, has the most lane miles of any district in the state of Texas. So there's also just a lot of preventative maintenance money in category 1 that will hit the Lubbock district.
Okay, I think that concludes our questions. Rocky, if you want to.
Well, again, I want to thank Commissioner New and Drew Campbell, our other speakers, for participating, and also everyone who took time to participate in the call and come in and hear our presentation and also provide us some questions. And with that, we'll conclude the conference call. Myself, I'll be available throughout the day for additional one-on-one interviews if journalists would like to discuss this further. Again, thanks to our speakers, and I hope everyone has a good day.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.